The morning fog lay thick over the streets of Harbor's Rest, a sleepy coastal town known more for its sunsets than for its news. Commander Elise Morgan sat in a corner booth of the Driftwood Cafe, nursing a steaming cup of black coffee. She wore civilian clothes now, faded jeans and a weathered leather jacket, but the way her eyes scanned the room betrayed her instincts. 20 years in naval intelligence wasn't something you shook off, not even in retirement. The cafe owner, Maggie Barnes, approached with a warm smile. Her silver hair was tied back in a loose braid and her hands carried a fresh pot of coffee. "Morning, Elise. You look like you're solving the world's problems again." Elise managed a faint smile. "Just enjoying the quiet." "You know," Maggie said, refilling the cup, "I've seen folks like you before, warriors who come here looking for peace. They never really find it." Before Elise could respond, the rumble of motorcycles shattered the morning calm. 2 sleek Harleys pulled into the gravel lot outside, their engines reverberating like thunder through the thin walls of the cafe. The handful of other patrons stiffened, conversation faltering. Elise's gaze flicked to the parking lot. The riders wore matching black leather vests emblazoned with a menacing red snake. Steel serpents. She recognized the gang's insignia from news briefings, local enforcers for a criminal network spreading up and down the coast. The riders swaggered into the cafe, helmets in hand. The leader, a scar-faced man with a cocky smirk, surveyed the room like he owned it. His companion, a hulking brute, followed close behind, radiating menace. "Morning, Maggie," the leader drawled, sliding onto a bar stool. "Missed you at the town meeting last night." Mayor Hayes was real disappointed. "I had inventory to do," Maggie said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled as she set the coffee pot down. Elise observed, her senses sharpening. The leader's posture screamed dominance, but his holster, a shoulder rig poorly concealed beneath his jacket, revealed amateur habits. His companion carried a knife strapped to his boot, poorly hidden and even more poorly secured. They were bullies, accustomed to obedience, not fighters used to genuine resistance. "Well," the leader said, leaning closer to Maggie, "when the mayor calls a meeting, it's not optional. You wouldn't want the town to think you're not a team player." Maggie didn't flinch. Maybe the mayor should focus on running the town instead of letting criminals dictate policy. The cafe went silent. The leader's smirk vanished as his hand slammed onto the counter. "What'd you just say to me, old woman?" Before Maggie could reply, Elise stood. "You heard her," she said, her voice calm but commanding. Every eye in the room turned to her. The biker's attention snapped to the tall, unassuming woman standing near the corner booth. The leader's grin returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This your idea of backup, Maggie? Some lady sipping coffee?" Elise took a step forward. "Here's how this goes," she said evenly. "You and your friend leave, now." The leader snorted, standing to his full height. "Or what?" Elise moved faster than thought. She caught his wrist mid-reach, twisting it with precise force. He gasped as his fingers spasmed open, the knife he'd been reaching for clattering to the floor. "Or," Elise said softly, her grip like iron, "I start breaking bones." The brute moved to intervene, but Elise's voice stopped him cold. "Don't." She locked eyes with him, her tone a blade's edge. "Your draw is slow, your footwork sloppy. By the time you move, this is over." The cafe remained silent, the tension suffocating. Finally, the leader raised his free hand. "Fine. We're leaving, but this isn't over." Elise released him, and the 2 bikers backed toward the door. As they mounted their bikes, the leader shot her one last venomous glare. "Who the hell are you?" Elise returned to her seat, her coffee now lukewarm. "Just someone who's seen enough bullies for one lifetime." Maggie placed a fresh cup in front of her. "You just painted a target on your back." "Maybe," Elise said, staring out the window as the steel serpents disappeared into the fog. "But they're not the only ones who should be worried." The fog lingered thick over Harbor's Rest as the day wore on, muffling the hum of life in the small coastal town. Elise Morgan sat in her modest apartment above the Driftwood Cafe, methodically cleaning her Glock 19. The rhythmic motion helped calm her mind, even as the events of the morning replayed in her head. She hadn't sought trouble, but trouble had a way of finding her. A knock at the door broke her concentration. Without looking up, Elise called. "It's open, Sheriff." Sheriff Tom Hayes stepped inside, his worn boots dragging slightly on the wooden floor. He was a tall, weathered man with a tiredness in his eyes that went deeper than sleepless nights. "Word travels fast in a town like this," Tom said, leaning against the doorway. "Heard you had a run-in with Jake Rattler and his crew." "They didn't seem like the polite types," Elise replied, reassembling her weapon with practiced precision. "Figured I'd offer some life advice." Tom chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Jake isn't the kind of guy to take advice, especially from someone who makes him look weak. "Good," Elise said. "He should get used to it." Tom frowned, crossing his arms. "I ran a background check on you when you moved here. 20 years in the Navy, classified operations, multiple commendations, and now you're fixing up an old boat and drinking coffee in Maggie's diner?" "Retirement," Elise replied without looking up. "Thought I'd try it out." "Well, retirement just got a lot more complicated." Tom pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Jake and his gang are more than just troublemakers. They've got ties to something bigger. A protection racket, smuggling operations, and who knows what else." Elise finally looked up, her gaze sharp. "What's the mayor's role in all this?" Tom hesitated before answering. "Mayor Hayes has been cooperative with the Steel Serpents. Officially, it's about economic growth, keeping the town's docks busy. Unofficially, it's protection money and looking the other way." "Cooperative?" Elise echoed, her tone cold. "You mean corrupt?" "Look, Elise," Tom said, leaning forward. "I've got a teenage daughter. I can't risk going after Jake and his people without backup, and the few deputies I trust are barely holding the line." Elise's expression didn't change. "So, you're here to ask for help?" "No," Tom said firmly. "I'm here to warn you. Jake's boss, Marcus Cross, is coming to town next week. He's the real power behind the Steel Serpents. If you're going to keep sticking your neck out, you need to understand what you're up against." At the mention of Marcus Cross, Elise's jaw tightened. The name stirred memories she had tried to bury, memories of her last mission with naval intelligence. Cross had been a ghost in her reports, a shadowy figure linked to smuggling operations across 3 continents. She'd never been able to pin him down, and her team had paid the price. "Thanks for the warning," Elise said after a long pause. "Anything else?" Tom stood, adjusting his belt. "Just this. Maggie's been a pillar of this town for 30 years. What you did this morning, it matters. But if you keep pushing, you'll be fighting a war, not a scuffle. Wars have casualties." As he left, Elise stared out the window, her mind already calculating. Cross wasn't just a threat to Harbor's Rest. He was a chance to settle an old score. Her phone buzzed on the table. Picking it up, she saw a message from a contact she hadn't reached out to in years. "Reynolds, heard you're back in the game. Call if you need backup." Elise typed a quick reply. "Might have a target for you. Need intel on Marcus Cross." The moment she hit send, she felt the gears of her old life turning again. Harbor's Rest had seemed like the perfect place to disappear, to leave her battles behind. But peace had a price, and sometimes the only way to protect it was to fight for it. That night, Elise went downstairs to find Maggie cleaning up for the evening. The older woman looked up as Elise entered, her usual warmth tinged with worry. "You've got that look," Maggie said, "the one that says you're about to do something dangerous." "I might have to," Elise admitted. "Jake and his gang are small potatoes compared to what's coming. If Marcus Cross is setting up shop here, the whole town's in danger." Maggie hesitated before stepping closer. "You're not alone, Elise," This town has people who care, who'll stand up if they have someone to lead them. Standing up gets people killed, Elise said bluntly. Maybe, Maggie replied, but it also keeps bullies from winning. Elise considered the older woman's words as she headed back upstairs. Alone in her apartment, she pulled a dusty lockbox from under her bed. Inside was a relic of her service, a military-grade encrypted phone. She powered it on for the first time in years and made a call. Reynolds, a familiar voice, answered on the second ring. "It's Morgan," Elise said. "I need everything you can find on Marcus Cross and the Steel Serpents." There was a pause. Then Reynolds asked, "You sure you want to do this?" "No," Elise admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." As the night deepened, Elise sat at her desk planning her next move. Harbor's Rest had given her a chance at peace, but peace wasn't a gift. It was something you had to earn. And if Cross wanted to bring his empire here, he'd have to get through her first. Because this time, Elise wasn't alone. And this time, she wouldn't fail. The sound of seagulls echoed through the crisp morning air as Harbor's Rest woke to another day. But the tranquil veneer of the small coastal town was beginning to crack. Elise Morgan sat at her usual spot in the Driftwood Cafe, her coffee untouched as she reviewed the intel Reynolds had sent overnight. Each detail painted a clearer picture of Marcus Cross and the Steel Serpents, a picture that reeked of danger. Maggie approached with a plate of toast and eggs. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Elise muttered, closing her laptop. "Just an old problem I thought I'd left behind." Before Maggie could press further, the roar of motorcycles interrupted their conversation. 3 Steel Serpent riders cruised past the cafe, slowing just enough to cast wary glances through the windows. Elise's eyes narrowed as she noted their formation, their deliberate pacing, a calculated move to assert dominance. "They've been circling all morning," Maggie said quietly. "Looking for you, I think." "They won't have to look far," Elise replied, sipping her coffee. "They'll get their answer soon enough." Later that day, Elise headed to the marina. She'd avoided Harbor's docks since moving to town, but the intel Reynolds had sent pointed to the port as a critical part of Cross's operation. Smuggling weapons, drugs, even people. Everything flowed through small, unassuming towns like Harbor's Rest. The docks were the lifeblood of this criminal empire. Elise walked the length of the main pier, blending in with the workers unloading crates of fresh fish. Her practiced eye caught subtle irregularities. Crates too clean for a fishing operation, vehicles parked just out of sight, and men who watched her a little too closely. "Need something, lady?" one of them asked as she passed. He was stocky, mid-30s, with the unmistakable swagger of someone used to intimidation. "Just taking in the view," Elise replied, her tone casual but her stance ready. "Pier's off limits to civilians," he said, stepping closer. "Might want to move along." Elise smiled faintly. "Sure. But tell your boss he's got a leak. Wouldn't want anyone tracing your shipments back to Singapore." The man stiffened, his hand twitching toward his belt. Before he could act, Elise slipped past him and vanished into the labyrinth of stacked crates. She didn't need a confrontation, not yet. For now, gathering intel was the priority. That evening, Elise returned to her apartment to find Sheriff Tom Hayes waiting for her, his expression grim. "You're making waves," he said without preamble. "They were already coming," Elise replied, tossing her keys onto the counter. "I'm just making sure they break where we can see them." Tom sighed and handed her a file. "Found this in the town records, contracts between the mayor's office and some shell companies. The names don't mean much, but I had them checked out. They're fronts for Cross's operations." "Why are you giving me this?" Elise asked, scanning the documents. "Because you're the only one who can do something about it," Tom said, his voice heavy. "The deputies I trust are already on thin ice. If we push too hard without solid evidence, the mayor will have us all fired, or worse." Elise nodded slowly. "This is enough to start." but we're going to need more if we want to take Cross down. Tom hesitated, then said, "There's a meeting tonight at the Serpent's Clubhouse. Mayor Hayes will be there. Word is they're finalizing plans for something big. I don't know what, but it's got Jake rattled." "Time?" Elise asked, already thinking of how to infiltrate. 9 o'clock, Tom said. "But be careful. Cross's people are professionals. They're not like Jake's crew." "Noted," Elise replied. As Tom left, she grabbed her phone and sent a message to Reynolds. "Need live surveillance on the Serpent's Clubhouse tonight." At exactly 9 p.m., Elise crouched on a hillside overlooking the steel Serpent's Clubhouse. The dimly lit building sat at the edge of town, surrounded by parked motorcycles and the faint hum of muffled music. Through her earpiece, Reynolds' voice came through clear. "6 vehicles on site," he said. 2 SUVs, 4 bikes. Heat signatures confirm at least 12 people inside. Elise adjusted her binoculars, scanning the windows for movement. She spotted Jake and another man, one she recognized from her files. Mike Crusher Peterson, Cross's lieutenant. The presence of someone that high-ranking meant the stakes were real. "Reynolds, keep recording," she said. "I'm going in closer." "Careful, Morgan," Reynolds warned. "You've got no backup." "Story of my life," Elise muttered. She moved silently down the hillside, slipping into the shadows near the clubhouse's back entrance. The faint hum of conversation carried through the walls. As she pressed closer, fragments of their meeting reached her ears. "The shipment arrives in 3 days, a gravelly voice said. "Cross wants everything in place by then." "And what about the locals?" Jake asked. "That woman from the cafe, she's trouble." "She's nothing," the gravelly voice replied dismissively. "Focus on the plan. Once the shipment is secured, we'll show this town what happens when people step out of line." Elisa's hand tightened around the knife she carried. She'd heard enough. Slipping back into the night, she returned to her vantage point and whispered into her earpiece. "Reynolds, I need everything on that shipment. Ports, routes, manifests, everything." "On it," Reynolds replied. "But Morgan, if Cross is bringing in reinforcements, this is bigger than you." "Then it's time to even the odds," Elise said, her voice cold. "Call in the team." Back at her apartment, Elise pulled out her encrypted phone. It had been years since she'd used the old channels, but now wasn't the time for hesitation. One by one, she made the calls. Each was answered by a voice from her past, men and women she'd trusted with her life. "It's Morgan," she said to each of them. "I need you." By the time the sun rose over Harbor's Rest, Elise had assembled a team of ghosts, specialists who operated in shadows, who thrived where others faltered. If Cross thought he could walk into her town and take control, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The storm was coming, and Elise Morgan was ready to meet it head-on. The air in Harbor's Rest carried the scent of salt and storm as dark clouds gathered over the town. Elise Morgan stood in the renovated basement of the Driftwood Cafe, a makeshift command center now alive with quiet urgency. Maps of the town and surrounding areas covered the walls, dotted with colored pins marking key locations. Her team was assembling, each member slipping into the room with the efficiency of seasoned professionals. Reynolds was the first to arrive, his face gaunt but sharp as ever. A former field operative, his expertise in surveillance and electronic warfare was unmatched. "Got the intel you wanted," he said, setting up his laptop. "Cross's shipment is arriving via an unregistered freighter at the South Dock. Weapons, high-value contraband, and something else? Encrypted files. I couldn't crack them, but whatever's in them is important." Next came Sam Hawk Hawkins, a sharpshooter who had covered Elise on countless missions. His calm demeanor belied a precision honed over years in the field. "Nice town," he said, setting his rifle case on the table. "Shame if something happened to it." Behind him was Claire Shade Matthews, an infiltration specialist who seemed to melt into shadows even in broad daylight. "What's the plan, Commander?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Finally, the last to enter was Stone, leader of the Iron Wolves, a motorcycle club made up of former special forces. His presence filled the room, his tactical vest and imposing build exuding quiet authority. "Got my people stationed on the outer roads," he said. "If they try to run, they won't get far." Elise nodded, her team now complete. "Here's the situation," she began, pointing to the map. "Cross's shipment arrives in 48 hours. He's bringing in muscle, but they don't know the terrain. We have the home field advantage." She placed a pin on the south dock. "This is the primary target. The shipment is critical, but so is the data. If we get that, we cripple not just Cross but his entire network." Reynolds pulled up a digital map on the laptop. "There's heavy activity around the docks already, patrols, checkpoints. Cross isn't taking chances." "That means we strike first," Elise said. "Hit them where they're not looking. Keep them off balance. They're expecting a gang war or maybe some law enforcement interference. What they're not expecting is us." As the team dispersed to prepare, Elise found herself alone with Stone. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying her. "You sure about this, Commander?" "Are you?" Elise countered, meeting his gaze. Stone chuckled. "Fair point. My people trust me. They'll follow my lead. Question is, do yours trust you enough to follow you into this storm?" Elise's lips pressed into a thin line. "They followed me into worse." "Good," Stone said, straightening. "Because Cross isn't playing games. He's bringing enough firepower to flatten this town. If we make one mistake—" "We won't," Elise interrupted. "We can't." Stone nodded and left without another word. The following night, Harbor's Rest felt like a ghost town. Most of the locals had retreated indoors, their instincts warning them of the brewing conflict. Elise stood on a rooftop overlooking the docks, her earpiece alive with chatter. "Reynolds, status," she said. "Thermal confirms 20 hostiles patrolling the perimeter," Reynolds replied. "4 SUVs parked near the main warehouse. Looks like they've set up a command center inside." "Hawk?" "Positioned and ready," the sharpshooter replied. "Got eyes on the west entrance. 2 guards, minimal cover." "Shade?" "Inside the fence," Claire whispered. "I've planted devices near the south warehouse. Ready to trigger when you are." "Stone?" "Wolves are in position on the outer roads," Stone replied. "They won't get far if they try to run." Elise adjusted her night vision goggles, scanning the dockyard. "We move on my signal. Keep it clean. Keep it fast. We hit them hard and fade before they know what's happening." The team acknowledged, their voices calm and focused. The operation began with surgical precision. Shade's devices detonated, plunging the southern perimeter into chaos as floodlights failed and alarms screamed. Hawk's rifle cracked twice, dropping the 2 guards at the west entrance before they could react. Elise led a small team through the eastern gate, her movements swift and silent. Reynolds provided real-time updates, his voice a steady anchor in her earpiece. 4 targets moving toward your position. 2 armed with rifles, 2 with sidearms. "I see them," Elise replied. She signaled to her team, and within moments, the hostiles were neutralized. Inside the main warehouse, the scene was chaotic. Crates of weapons and supplies were scattered across the floor, and the air buzzed with frantic radio chatter. Cross's men were scrambling, their tight coordination unraveling under the unexpected assault. "Commander," Shade's voice came through. "I'm inside the office. Found the server, downloading the data now." "Good work," Elise said. "Make it fast." From her vantage point, Elise saw a figure she recognized, Jake Rattler Davidson. He was barking orders, his usual bravado replaced with panic. Elise smirked. She'd been waiting for this. She descended into the warehouse like a storm, that moving with lethal efficiency. Jake turned just in time to see her and raised his weapon, but Elise was faster. Her knife slashed through the air, disarming him in a single motion. "You again," Jake spat, clutching his wrist. "You have no idea what you're messing with." "I know exactly what I'm messing with," Elise replied, her voice ice cold, "and I'm here to finish it." By the time the sun rose, the docks were secured. Cross's shipment was confiscated, his encrypted files extracted, and his men either captured or fleeing into the wind. The Iron Wolves patrolled the roads, ensuring no one slipped through the net. In the aftermath, Elise stood with her team, the faint hum of victory in the air. Stone clapped her on the shoulder. "Not bad, Commander. Not bad at all." Reynolds approached, holding a flash drive. "The data's clean. Cross's entire operation. Names, locations, routes. We've got him." Elise took the drive, her grip firm. "Then it's time to end this." Marcus Cross was coming to Harbor's Rest. Elise knew it. And when he did, he wouldn't find a frightened town waiting to be conquered. He'd find her. The tension in Harbor's Rest was palpable as the town braced for the storm they knew was coming. Marcus Cross's retaliation wouldn't be subtle. It would be a show of force designed to break both spirit and resolve. But Elise Morgan wasn't about to let that happen. The Driftwood Cafe's basement had transformed into a full-fledged command center. Elise stood before the map of the town, surrounded by her team, Reynolds, Shade, Hawk, Stone, and Maggie, who joined them with her worn notebook full of years' worth of meticulous observations about the town's underbelly. Reynolds tapped on his laptop, projecting live satellite imagery onto the wall. "Cross is moving fast," he reported. "Convoy of 5 SUVs spotted heading down the coast highway, ETA 2 hours. "Any confirmation he's with them?" Elise asked. "Thermal scans show a larger security detail than usual," Reynolds replied. "If Cross isn't there, he's sending someone high up the chain." Stone crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. "If he's coming in person, it means one of two things. Either he's desperate, or he's planning to crush us in one move." "We'll assume the latter," police said. "What about the rest of his forces?" "They're consolidating at the old cannery on the north side of town," Shade added. 30 hostiles minimum. High ground, good sightlines, fortified positions. Elise's mind worked like a machine, piecing together the battlefield. "They're setting up the cannery as their base of operations," she said. "They'll expect us to hit them there directly." "So, what's the play?" Stone asked. Elise moved a pin on the map to the south dock. "We draw them out. Force them to split their forces. Hit them hard where they're weak." She turned to Maggie. "You've got the list of the businesses they've been using?" Maggie nodded. "Every shop and warehouse they've touched, including the ones they've been laundering money through. I've also marked the spots where their lookouts usually sit." "Good," Elise said. "We'll make them think they're losing control of the town. Martinez and her deputies will handle the visible disruptions while we set up the real strike." Hawk grinned. "Classic misdirection. I like it." As the clock ticked down, the team sprang into action. Martinez and her deputies staged coordinated traffic stops and surprise inspections at key points, drawing attention away from the docks. Meanwhile, Stone's Iron Wolves rolled through the streets, creating the illusion of a rival gang encroaching on Steel Serpent territory. At the same time, Elise led a small team to the docks. Shade slipped through the shadows, planting explosives on the main support beams of the cannery. Hawk took up a sniper's perch overlooking the harbor, his rifle aimed at the convoy's expected arrival point. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Lure Cross's forces into the open and strike with precision. The first wave of SUVs arrived just after sunset. The vehicles pulled into the cannery lot, their headlights cutting through the fog. Elise watched from her vantage point as men disembarked, their weapons drawn. "Visual confirmation," Reynolds said through her earpiece. "Cross isn't with them, but his second-in-command, Crusher, is." "That's enough," Elise replied. "Phase 1, go." The signal was given, and Shade detonated her first set of charges. Explosions rocked the north side of the cannery, sending dust and debris into the air. The Steel Serpent forces scrambled, shouting orders and firing blindly into the smoke. At the same time, Martinez's deputies launched a raid on the Steel Serpent's safe houses, backed by Stone's Iron Wolves. It was chaos, and Elise knew that chaos was her best weapon. As the steel serpents struggled to regain control, Elise and her team moved into the cannery. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and gunpowder. Shade led the way, her movements precise and silent. Hawk provided overwatch, his rifle picking off any hostiles who ventured too close. They reached the heart of the cannery, an old storage room repurposed as a command center. Crusher stood at the center, barking orders into a radio. Elise signaled her team to hold back. This one was hers. She stepped into the room, her weapon raised. Crusher turned, his face twisting into a sneer. "Well, if it isn't the cafe lady," he said, dropping the radio. "You should have stayed in your corner." "I don't do corners," Elise replied. Crusher lunged, but Elise was ready. They clashed with brutal efficiency, exchanging blows that echoed through the room. Crusher was strong, but Elise was faster. She ducked under his swing and delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus, sending him staggering. "You have no idea what you're up against," he growled, clutching his stomach. "Neither do you," Elise said coldly. With a final strike, she sent him crashing to the floor, unconscious. As the dust settled, Elise's team secured the remaining hostiles. Martinez's deputies arrived moments later, cuffs ready for the few who hadn't fled. "We've got him," Reynolds said, holding up a hard drive he'd pulled from the command center. Detailed plans for Cross's entire operation. Elise nodded, exhaustion starting to set in. "Good, but this isn't over. Cross isn't the type to forgive or forget." Stone approached, his expression grim. "Then we finish it. No more running, no more waiting. We take the fight to him." Elise looked at her team, battle-worn but unwavering. "Agreed. Cross thinks he can control Harbor's Rest, but we're going to show him what happens when you push a town too far." As the night deepened, Harbor's Rest stood defiant against the looming storm. The steel serpents had been dealt a heavy blow, but Elise knew the final battle was still ahead. Cross would come, and when he did, she and her team would be ready. Thunder rumbled over Harbor's Rest as Elise Morgan prepared for the inevitable clash. In the basement of the Driftwood Cafe, her team gathered around a table covered in maps and live surveillance feeds. Reynolds tapped his laptop, the screen showing 3 SUVs approaching the docks. "Cross is in the lead vehicle," he confirmed. "He's brought heavy security, at least 15 armed men." "They're confident," Elise said. "Let's make them regret it." She outlined the plan with precision. Stone and the Iron Wolves would create a diversion on the West Road, drawing out Cross's forces. Shade would disable the SUVs to trap the convoy. Hawk would take overwatch, providing sniper support. Elise, alongside Reynolds and Martinez, would infiltrate the docks to capture Cross and dismantle his operation for good. "Let's move," Elise ordered, her voice steady despite the storm's howling winds. The convoy reached the Western Road where the Iron Wolves launched their attack. Explosions lit up the night as motorcycles roared through the chaos, forcing the SUVs to reroute toward the docks. "They're moving to the secondary approach," Reynolds reported. At the docks, Shade moved like a shadow, planting EMP devices on the SUVs. Moments later, the vehicles ground to a halt, their electronics fried. "Targets immobilized," Shade whispered. The steel serpents spilled out, forming a defensive perimeter. Cross stepped out, flanked by bodyguards, his expression cold and calculating. "You've been busy, Commander Morgan," he called out. "Let's see how far that gets you." Elise emerged from the shadows, weapon raised. "Your mistake was coming here. This town isn't yours to take." Cross motioned to his men. "Kill her." Gunfire erupted. Hawk's rifle cracked, dropping targets with precision. Stone's Iron Wolves tore through enemy lines while Shade and Martinez moved in to disable the remaining guards. Elise cut through the chaos, closing in on Cross. Inside the warehouse, she confronted him. Cross fought hard, his strength matching her skill, but Elise's determination prevailed. A final strike sent him to his knees. "It's over," Elise said, her voice steady. Cross smirked, blood dripping from his lip. There's always another snake. Not here, Elise replied. As dawn broke, Cross's operation lay in ruins. The team regrouped at the Driftwood Cafe, weary but triumphant. To Harbor's Rest, Stone said, raising a mug. A town that fights back. Elise smiled. And always will. The dawn after the battle was quiet. Harbor's Rest seemed unchanged at first glance. Waves lapped gently at the docks, and the scent of rain lingered in the air. But beneath the calm, the town carried the weight of what had transpired. The Steel Serpents were no more, their leader Marcus Cross in federal custody, along with evidence that would dismantle his entire network. In the Driftwood Cafe, the command center had been replaced with warm mugs of coffee and plates of Maggie's apple pie. Elise Morgan sat at her usual booth, staring out at the peaceful street. Her team surrounded her, their quiet chatter tinged with exhaustion and relief. Reynolds approached, holding a tablet. Just got confirmation from the feds. Cross is talking. His network is crumbling. That's good news, Elise said, her voice calm but weary. How far does it reach? Farther than we thought, Reynolds replied. Dozens of small towns along the coast were targeted. We've disrupted their entire playbook. Stone leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. They won't stop. Another cross will rise. Another gang will try. Let them, Elise said, her gaze unwavering. We've proven that small towns aren't easy prey. They'll think twice before trying again. Across town, Martinez and her deputies worked to clean up the aftermath. Civilians emerged from their homes, hesitant but hopeful. The docks, once controlled by fear, now stood as a symbol of resilience. Maggie approached Elise's booth, placing a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. You've done something special here, she said, her voice soft. Not just for the town, but for the people. Elise offered a faint smile. It wasn't just me. This town stood up when it mattered. And it will again, Maggie said, thanks to you. That evening, Elise gathered her team one last time in the cafe's basement. The maps were gone, replaced by a single message on the wall. Harbor's Rest. We protect our own. To Harbor's Rest, Stone said, raising a mug. And to what comes next? What does come next? Shade asked, her voice quiet. Elise looked around at her team. Warriors, survivors, friends. We stay ready. If another town needs us, we'll be there. This isn't just about one fight. It's about making sure no one stands alone. The room fell silent as her words sank in. They weren't just a team. They were a beacon for small towns everywhere. As night fell, Elise walked through Harbor's Rest. The streets were quiet, but they no longer felt fragile. The town was stronger now, its people emboldened by what they'd endured. She paused outside the cafe, staring up at the stars. For the first time in years, Elise felt at peace. The battle was over, but her mission wasn't. She'd found something worth fighting for, something bigger than herself. Let them come, she whispered to the night. We're ready. And with that, she turned and walked into the quiet, knowing the fight for Harbor's Rest had forged a legacy no enemy could ever erase. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.